Good morning. It is my pleasure to welcome you to the fourth session of the five-part negotiation webinar series hosted in partnership by Manitoba Agriculture and Supply Chain Canada. Power, Persuasion, and Ethics. I am Annette Allen, Business Development Specialist with Manitoba Agriculture's Value Added Branch, and I will be your moderator today. I'd like to kick off this webinar with a land acknowledgement. We recognize that Manitoba is on the treaty territories and ancestral lands of the Anishinaabe, Anishinaabe, Dakota Oiate, the Nessalan, and the Nehethawuk peoples. We acknowledge Manitoba is located on the homeland of the Red River Métis. We acknowledge northern Manitoba includes lands that were and are the ancestral lands of the Inuit. We respect the spirit and intent of treaties and treaty making and remain committed to working in partnership with First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people in the spirit of truth, reconciliation, and collaboration. As always, today's webinar is being recorded and the link will be sent to you after the event. If you have questions during the presentation, please do type them into the Q&A at the bottom of the browser, and we will address them at the end of the presentation. I would like to welcome back our presenter of this negotiation series, Mr. Rick Reed. Rick Reed is the CEO for the Manitoba Institute of Supply Chain Canada. Rick has over 25 years of supply chain experience in both the public and private sectors. He specializes in optimizing supply chains and has helped organizations develop strategies to maximize their efficiency and profitability. Welcome back, Rick.
Thanks, Annette, and welcome everyone. Glad to be here again. We're on the home stretch. We're coming to the end of some of the topics that are part of the series. Today, we're going to talk about some of the more intangible pieces of a negotiation. Intangible but very important, and it's the concepts of power, persuasion, and ethics. So your takeaways, what I'm going to be talking about today is the concepts of trust, and the different approaches to trust and what can cause mistrust. It may seem fairly obvious to all of us. I mean, we go through life every day talking to people and either trusting them or not, or having issues that cause us to distrust them. We're going to talk about sources of power, persuasion techniques, and ethical negotiation. So the key thing here is in any negotiation, it's critical that there's an element of trust. I mean, you don't always know the individual that you're negotiating with. In most cases in life, you don't. You meet somebody and you want to buy something or you want to get something from them and they want something from you, and then you end up back and forth. It's really critical early on that you start to establish trust and have some sort of a connection with that individual. Because a good agreement, whatever's negotiated, is only worth something if both parties trust each other to actually follow through on whatever has been agreed to. And if you're going through the process and you can't trust this person, where you just got that nagging feeling in the back of your neck that, what's their angle? What's the agenda? What are they really trying to do? You're not going to get to an agreement necessarily, or not the best agreement that you possibly can, because of that lack of trust. So it's really critical that you're aware of this, not only as your value-added person, but what you're doing that's either demonstrating trustworthiness or not when you're, to the other person, the other party that you're dealing with. So, trust in a buyer-supplier relationship, or it could be doesn't have to be buyer-supplier, just using that, but, you're going to want to get to know somebody. You have a new supplier come in and you're going to have to start building, an understanding. What can they do? What are they trustworthy? Are they competent? Are they somebody that's going to follow through? Do they have the skill sets, to deliver? Do they have a solution that can help me? Um, you're gonna have a mediating variable. Like that's where negotiation, you can have that, third party mediating variable. That's where, when you're doing, um, in Asia, for example, you can get recommended by somebody. One of the best ways to find a new supplier is to have them recommended by somebody that you've been doing business with for a while. So that's a mediating variable that helps start you on the path to trust. But the fact is, there is no simple way, to measure it or determine it, or it's really a lot of, gut feels and, um, I think I can trust this person. And there's really a hard way to measure. There really is no way to measure that. But there's basically three concepts of trust, and depending on where you are in the spectrum is really going to determine, um, it's really going to determine, how that negotiation goes, right? Like you have deterrence based, which I think everybody understands, is that if you're in a situation where you don't believe the other party is going to follow through, or the other person isn't going to do what they say they're going to do, then what you do is that, your trust will be deterrence based. You will put things into that agreement that, will penalize them if they don't follow through. So it could be, something as innocuous as a bond, right? Where a party's expected to put up a bond to complete the work, and if they don't complete the work, you get the money from the bond. It could be, um, you get a reduction in price. It could be you get free product. It could be, whatever it happens to be. So deterrence based is certainly, pretty common. Lots of people see it, in there. The issue with deterrence based though is that it's really kind of focused on a short term, kind of scenario, because you can't keep going through and expect to have long-term profitable or valuable relationships with individuals on an ongoing basis if you're constantly bringing up deterrence based. If you're applying a deterrence based concept to your level of trust to somebody, so it's short term. It's generally kind of a more of a win-lose kind of, or a distributor type negotiation, usually where it's used. As opposed to if you're looking to be integrative and win-win, you're probably going to see less so of that. Knowledge base is pretty straightforward. It's basically that you have a knowledge of the individual, and so basically you have an understanding of um, how they're going to react. You've done business for a while, their hot button issues, what sets them off, situations where they're going to be, hey, absolutely, and there are no situations where they're going to be resistant. So knowing the other party, is where you have a knowledge-based concept of trust, and that's where, um, you're going to find that more in those win-win or integrative bargaining situations, because you have some sort of relationship, and because of that, you understand, you know, yeah, these things are going to tick them off, and these things are going to be all right, and so what happens is that you behave differently in that situation. And then identification based is just basically, empathy. You empathize with the other. You understand each other. You know where they're coming from. Um, there's a connection in that sense. And again, it's something that does help, in those win-win, or integrated bargaining situations, because there's that commonality that you're seeing in there. You can empathize with where they are, and you want to, yeah, we can go do this. So those are the concepts of trust as you, go into your negotiations. And as I said, depending on whether you're in a short-term one-shot deal, or it's a strategically critical, supplier that you're dealing with long-term, it's going to determine much which concept that you're going to be applying to how you approach that negotiation. So trust is hard to measure, but there are ways that you can help develop trust. And one of them is just at the top, for example, is transfer personal conflicts to task conflict. Is just because you have an issue with somebody, just because um, you may not like them or they may not like you, doesn't mean that you can't negotiate or you can't do business or you can't build trust. Um, because there's more to it than just I don't like you. You know, just because I don't like somebody doesn't mean I don't trust them to perform as expected, for example. So, but one way that you can start doing it is, and this is the same in any relationships, is that if you focus on behavior, if you focus on the behavior rather than the personality, you're generally going to have more success. You know, because if you're talking about personality, if you're talking about personal conflict, any sort of discussion ends up being personal. It's like a personal attack to you or a personal attack to them. They're going to take it as that. And what happens is that, it's a natural thing. When you feel like you're being attacked, you respond in kind and you come back in a similar fashion because nobody likes to feel that they're being attacked. But if you want to build trust, getting away from talking about people, and or that personal connection and start talking about the problem at hand, or the task conflict in this sense, uh, is one way to start building trust. Because what happens is it puts you, in a situation where you can get to number two, which is where you can start finding some common or shared goals or shared vision. As I said, you may not like each other. It may not be a pleasant experience to negotiate with them. But if you can be talking about something that gets to a mutually beneficial agreement at the end, because that shared goal of having something mutually beneficial, at the end of the process, you can start building trust with each other and respect with each other where, yeah, you don't have to go to have a drink with them. You don't have to go to their birthday parties or anything like that. But you can have a functioning, productive relationship with them based on trust and respect. Capitalizing on connections. Again, this is one, especially if you're meeting somebody for new, the first time, capitalizing on shared connections where an introduction by somebody, that can speak, about you and them. Okay, sorry, I hope that, yeah, somebody's car alarm's going off. Sorry about that. But where you can capitalize on connections, where what happens is that referral by somebody or somebody, that third party talking about, yeah, you know what, Joe's a good guy or Jane's a great gal. They can be really trusted. They did a good work for me and they did not. That's a way that actually kind of, you know, opens the door for you to be able to start building trust because you have a third party that maybe the other side respects, telling them that, yeah, you can trust this person. They do what they say they're going to do. It takes some of the fear away of dealing with you because, they've heard from a trusted, friend or acquaintance or colleague saying, yeah, you know what, this person's a good egg. So, capitalizing on that. And you'll find in some cases, if you're in negotiating internationally, that's probably one of the most valuable things you can do. I know some of the new suppliers when I've been sourcing internationally, um, where we were able to move from introduction to doing business the quickest were introduced to me by people that we had been doing business with for years. We were sourcing something that our existing supply base couldn't do. And so they introduced us to somebody that could do it. And what happened was we were able to kind of get over some of the initial steps to, we were able to get quicker from point A to point B because in that situation, that supplier wasn't about to give us somebody or recommend somebody that was going to make them look like a fool. Find a shared problem or enemy. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to have everybody go mean girls or anything like that, but I don't like the enemy thing or the other problem child. But this is similar to number two: is find a shared problem, find something that's an issue for both of you, and work on it together to come to a common solution. And the process in itself is going to build a relationship. It's going to allow you to build trust because the other side, both sides are going to be able to see each other at work. And then they're going to be able to, start to develop that trust and respect because you've worked together on something and focusing on the future. don't look at the past. Don't dwell on the past. I mean, you should learn from it, but don't dwell on it. But focus on the future. And win-win agreements are focused on the future. It's focused on mutual benefit going forward. It's not about harping on what happened in the past. So doing that and being positive and being forward looking is another way to help develop trust. But there are indirect approaches to developing trust. I won't go through each of these, but I will, these are just some examples. There are others. Um, the ones that I do want to talk about is positive mood. And I can't emphasize how much, you know, emotions um, and attitudes play in developing trust when you're negotiating with people that, the first time you meet. Um, People, everybody's in the office, everybody's been around that person, that it doesn't matter. They could win the lottery and they'd be happy that it wasn't twice as much. They could get a new car and they'd be mad it's a Ford, not a Chevy. Um, it could be, those people that it doesn't matter what happens to them, that they're always sour about something, you know, and what do you do? Like, do you rush over and always want to be with these people, or do you just generally go, I don't need that in my life, and generally avoid them and wish that, if you're really that unhappy, can you just leave or quit or do something just to put us all out of your misery? Um, Positive moods are contagious. Positive moods, you know, or approaches are huge in coming at people. As I said, negativity is exactly that. It's negative. And it's that first impression that people have. I mean, it doesn't mean that you have to be uploaded. Everybody has a bad day and somebody catches you at the wrong time. That happens. It's correctable. But um, you come in positive. And I'm not talking over the top silly, but just come in positive and energetic and um, as you said, forward looking. You're starting off on the right foot to start building trust with somebody. And as opposed to coming in all negative and or no emotions at all. So I really encourage you when you go into these things, be positive. You don't poker face, has its times, but generally be positive and you know be open to new ideas and that, and that's really going to help develop trust in people that you're meeting for the first time. Reciprocity, we're going to talk. I'm going to show you a short video if it works a little bit here. But reciprocity, if somebody does something for you, do the same for them when you can. I don't really like the schmoozing, the flattery. I mean, it does. I mean, be nice. If you have something, where you can compliment somebody on something they've done or that. I mean, yes, you know what? There's nothing wrong with that. Don't gloat is obviously one. Gloating or just being arrogant. Those kind of things don't necessarily help build trust. Um, so just again, I'm not going to go through the rest of it. It's really important, and this is where I said about building trust is it's not just what you're feeling from the other person. It's what signals of these things that you're doing that you're giving off to somebody else or not giving off. Mistrust, obviously, lots of things, is other than outright lie, catching somebody an outright lie. But other things, poor communication. That's probably the big one is that poor communication leaves a vacuum. It leaves gaps in people's understanding. And it's human nature for people to fill in the gap, as best they can. And because again, it's just, when you don't understand something, it's a human nature to try to turn it in your head and come up with some sort of explanation that makes sense. It's just human nature. So when you have poor communication between parties, you leave the door open for somebody to start filling in the blanks that may be based in reality and might not be. And that's where, as soon as that comes set, it's very hard to overcome and, to build trust because there's always going to be that doubt in their mind. So communication is critical, whether it be what you put in writing, what you say to them, it's what you're not saying to them is also important. But poor communication is what I've always found is one of the biggest reasons. And when you can talk to people, when you can open those channels of communication, you start to find that trust builds because you have a good channel of communication with people and you have a healthy sharing of information both ways. And what happens is a lot of that, mistrust goes away. Breach of confidence, that's simply lying in a sense. Splitting the pie, how aggressively you split the pie can cause that too. And that's more in a win-lose negotiation, because that can cause mistrust. If you have the power and you're leveraging it and you use it to, you know, take kind of what's equitably fair, but a lot more other than that, it can cause mistrust. Bad apples, that's just, some people are just miserable people. But again, failure to try to find a win-win, which we are actually respective of what the other party needs or wants. No commitments where you don't follow through, rudeness, arrogance. Again, all these things make sense. And these are just some examples. It's not a comprehensive list. These are just examples, and there are others that people go, but people will identify. But everybody has examples of what behavior leads us to not trust somebody. And the question is, it's great when you're evaluating them, but how much have you looked at yourself? And how much have you looked at your behavior in terms of how it may be signaling that I shouldn't be trusted? And that's the harder part to do is, really looking at yourself and being open to that 360 analysis from people that you trust to tell you, hey, this may not be coming off the way you think, or this might be sending the wrong signal. And how do you adjust your own behavior to make sure you're not giving out the wrong signal? So, as I said, you might have a situation where somebody, you talk about positive mood, you come in and you're kind of sour and you're a little short with people and you might, maybe going, I can't trust this guy, he's a jerk. But I said it's repairable if it's, if they got you on a bad day and then you deal with it in short order. And some of the ways, here's, some examples of what you can do. The biggest one though is, and this kind of goes back to, um, one of the biggest causes of mistrust, which is miscommunication, is suggest a personal meeting, get together with somebody. You're not going to solve it sitting in your office, you know, away from the individual involved. You need to, get in front of them. You need to get together and hash it out. And in order to do that, you have to figure out where the communication broke down. Is generally my own experience, is what the leading reason is so you get together, you say, hey, I thought this is the, here's a situation. I know that we had a disagreement. I'm not happy about it. This behavior made me upset, or this behavior is leading me to conclude this. And I don't understand why you're doing this. Help me understand why you're behaving the way you are. And what happens is that they're not only going to tell you, but then they're also going to tell you what you're doing that's taking them off. But at least then everything's out, you air the dirty laundry. You have an opportunity to not only resolve that particular conflict, but you provide the foundation on which to go build trust going forward. Because what you've done is you've opened up that channel of communication and you have that ability to share information with each other to get to that common goal. So personal meetings are a big way. If you're feeling that you're not trusting somebody or there's an issue, arrange a meeting and explain what your concerns are and try to, engage them to figure out if there's something you're doing that's causing the behavior. Is there something that you can change, what you'd like them to change? That's the best thing. It's not a comfortable experience in some cases, but it's necessary if you want to have successful negotiated agreements going, in the long term going forward. And part of that, when you have that meeting, is exactly on number two, talk about why the relationship's important. It's not about going and whacking somebody. It's about, explaining exactly that. It's about sharing why the relationship's important and how you want it to work. but that this behavior isn't going to help it in the long term and we need to adjust it. So in some ways, it's similar to an employer relationship. It's just more on a peer-to-peer kind of thing, or a husband-wife relationship in a sense. Apologize. That's probably on this, out of all these ideas, this is probably the most powerful tool in the toolbox to help repair mistrust is apologize. And I say apologize whether it's your fault or not. And people are going to go, some of you are probably sitting there going, well, what the heck's he talking about? Why am I apologizing if I didn't do anything? It's not about whether you did or not. It's about finding a connection with that person. And, so if you go into that personal meeting, if you come in and going, you're probably not going to get the outcome that you're looking for. So it's a little bit about framing. If you know you did something that ticked somebody off, you don't have to say apologize for doing it. I apologize that this upset you. And I felt I needed to do this because of this. And I am sorry that this, caused you difficulty. And I would like to understand more how it did. So maybe we can find a better way to do it going forward. That kind of approach all of a sudden does two things. Number one, it shows that you're acknowledging that they're not, that they're unhappy. They feel that they've been um, personally um, hurt in this. But more importantly, by the fact that you just took the moment to simply say, I'm sorry. And, or, that you're feeling that way, or you're sorry that this is the result, is that you're giving them permission to do the same, where you kind of de-escalate that situation and then you can get to the root cause of what it is, and you come up with something mutually beneficial that can get you guys to the other side. So sometimes I've used it all the time, and you know, sometimes because I know that I did something that maybe hurt somebody, or that maybe caused a mistrust, or just because I want to set the discussion off on the right tone. Because if I do that, usually the first words out of the mouth is I usually get, from the other party is, yeah, I'm sorry too. Well, what can we do to resolve it? What can we do to go forward? And it usually ends up being pretty productive. So, apologizing, you know, whether it's you or not is a pretty powerful tool. Let steam blow. Everybody's heard that. If when tempers are up, give it 24 hours. Don't go deal with it right away. Give it 24 hours, come back after everybody's kind of brought the temperature down a little bit. Try not to be defensive, be open-minded, using your active listening and stuff to clarification, test understanding, that makes sense. But basically the last one on here is do a relationship checkup. Like once you've had that personal meeting, you've kind of hashed it through and you've come up with um, that path forward where it's resolved and you have a path forward. Just the last question, and it doesn't have to be anything more than, so are we good? Right? You know, and that's all it is. It's just a final one. And usually it's, yeah, we are, and a shake of hands and away you go. But do that, that relationship checkup at the very end after you've done it is going to tell you, because you can tell in the tone of voice and everything. And then, whether there's something else or whether you've actually got it done. And that's a good thing. It's a way to show that the relationship's important too. So, so that's about building trust and some of the things that, that can either hurt, you know, the building of trust, or it can help you rebuild it. But let's talk about power, persuasion, and ethics. Now, everybody's been in a situation where you go in and you're the smaller party, or you're the smaller of the two entities, and um, you're not the alpha in the relationship, so to speak. And it's not a fun situation where you're doing your best to get um, as much as you can, but you're really kind of stuck just in many ways having to accept the terms of whatever being given you. Because the option for them is, well, yeah, you're not that big of important, and we're going to do this out of the generosity of our heart. And if you don't like it, tough. We're not going to give you any more. So it's not a good feeling. But power is more than just who's got the biggest stick. And we've talked about it in the first three sessions. The greatest source of your power is your baton. The better the alternatives you have, the more power you have in that negotiation. And as I said in the previous sessions, the better your alternatives, the stronger your position, because the power good alternatives give you is the power to walk away, the power to not have to accept what somebody gives you, right? And that's the biggest thing. And you see it now, and it's, as somebody that's taught this for many years, you know, I have to admit, if there's one thing that our president down south has been good for on this topic, is being able to demonstrate many of these things, um, many of these principles in action where everybody can see and understand them. And you look at the Canada US situation right now, and you see the prime minister right now, whether you agree with him or not, whether you have voted for him or not, but what you see the prime minister doing is doing his level best over the past year to improve Canada's BAT. We do 75, 80% of our volumes with the United States. Losing access, duty-free access, or duty and tariff-free access to the US would be not good for the Canadian economy because we would sell less. And so in that situation, the current administration in the US understands that, and it's going to be the stick that they use to try to extract concessions from Canada in the upcoming CUSMA negotiation. So what has the prime minister been doing? He's been running around, and his team have been going around and they've been signing deals, MOUs, trade deals. They've restarted free trade agreements with India and Mercosur in South America. And they just did, something with South Korea here yesterday, and they did something with Germany, this week as well. And so what's happening is that going into it, um, the federal government is doing their best to improve our alternatives so that if we have to walk away, or if the other party walks away, we have alternatives. And so that's what's, in a sense, it takes time. It should have been happening a long time ago, unfortunately. But the thing is, right now, they're trying to improve our power in that negotiation by improving our options, what our alternatives are, in case we can't get an agreement. So patent is the most powerful one, and I can't emphasize it enough. It's why it comes up so often is work on your alternatives. Always have alternatives. Always be trying to improve your alternative, and your power in that negotiation will be improved. Information. You've heard me use the term over the last couple of three sessions, be the smartest person in the room. And that's really what about information is. It's understanding the problem at hand. It's understanding the alternatives that are available, the risks that are associated with this, the needs and wants of the other party, yourselves, how the situation comes in. The more you understand that, the more informed you can be on the problem being dealt with and from all angles, the more power you have because you're better equipped to to move through that negotiation in a way that gets you to the successful outcome. Because it's what you don't know is what's going to come back and hurt you. So information is key. And being prepared, is going to give you more power in that negotiation because it's what's going to inform you on the power in your baton. How good is your baton? Status is power. You have a situation where, are you the junior buyer or are you the CEO of the company? Are you just the guy on the shop floor, or are you, the vice president of sourcing, so to speak? So your status and your rank can certainly have that because there's some inherent power just in that, in your title. Social networks. Yes, you get into your networks. They can be a source of power because power isn't always like the big stick. Power is sometimes the ability to influence. And social networks, or your network in general, you know, a well-maintained network, because it is, and not just people you happen to know and through in your LinkedIn. It's people you have relationships with that you can give a call to, that you can get help from. You can get a word of advice. You can have a good word to somebody. You can get access. Those networks are sources of power too, because when they're multipliers to yourself. Because all of a sudden you can bring other pieces to a solution, right? It's a multiplier on what you have to offer. Because your network might be able to offer something else. You might give somebody access to a network that can give them, something that they need or want. So networks are a source of power too, which is why you should always be, curating them and looking after those relationships, and that is all the time. And physical appearance, right? You show up looking like a homeless person, people are going to be focused on that. They're not going to be thinking about, Jesus, this person competent. They're going to be wondering what the heck's going on. And they're going to look down their nose at you going, okay, do you really want to do business with this guy? So yes, physical appearance is important as well. Now, persuasion, has, both, central and peripheral roots or techniques that you can use. The big one that a lot of people don't realize is, a big tool is one of the biggest tools in your toolbox is the agendas, is who controls the agenda. And controlling the agenda allows you to set up how that conversation is going to go. Like people think, oh, agenda, oh yeah, we're going to throw it together. We're going to throw 5 things out. We're going to talk about this, this, and this, and this. But how many times have you gone into a negotiation where you've actually sent the other party an agenda of what you want to talk about? And how many times have you actually, when you put that agenda together, have you thought about which order do I want to talk to them about? Like, what's the best order for me to put the agenda in that's going to give me that's going to maximize my ability to get to the outcome that I desire? And some of you might be sitting there going, what the heck's he talking about? Or I don't understand that. It's really about, do I talk about the biggest issue first? Where there's probably the most contentious issue first? Or do I save the most contentious issue to last? And do I line up other items where there's less contention to them, where there's a greater likelihood of agreement, where I can get a positive effect that yes, 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 yes. Okay, let's deal with the most contentious one. But we've successfully solved these other items, and so you build up to the big one. Right. But what happens is you've already started to establish trust. You've already started to establish some success and agreement and momentum. And so what you do is you line it up to get to, before you tackle the last one, because then now at least you got some momentum, some positive momentum leading into what might be the most contentious issue. And it does, and when you got positive momentum, when you have positive emotions, when you're putting those things in, hey, this is great, 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 and you get to something that's a little trickier, you can keep it going, but you can use that momentum, that positive attitude, and that collaboration, that collaborative approach to deal with those things and help avoid some conflict. But you can also, if you put them in, something that might happen, that might just be, hey, the things with less conflict and save the most conflict to the end. But you also might say, hey, if I do this, if we do this for this and this, it helps make my ask over here more rational, or it seem more appropriate because we've done these things and it builds up where all of a sudden, instead of me just asking, it seems out of the blue, it's just a natural thing that I should be doing. I should be getting this other example. So and I'll use as I recall, I think I gave the example of, um, when I was, teaching, when I was coaching club soccer, and we had to split up teams, and I had to give away players. We were, we were the team that was there. We were one of the best ones in the league. They had these other two come in, and the club didn't want to have one team be up here and two be down here. So I was going to have to give up some good players. And, so I had some parents that, were not the most fun to be around. They were, those parents. And the kids were, the two kids in question, they wouldn't work with others. It was kind of their own little clique, which is not good for a team. And so, when I went into the negotiation, when I came back, I ordered up, well, hey, like we need to put players of identifying players available and do the ones from the tryouts, do that last. And the reason being is I like the idea was to move kids around and then we would choose players off the tryout list to fill in the gaps. But what I did right off the bat is I said, well, I did that way so that I could give away the two players, two of my better ones that were causing problems, both them and their parents. I could give them away and I could help the other guy get two players off the other, get them to shift some players. But I did that first to give them something, to give both sides something so that when it came to picking the tryout players, I got first pick of the players I wanted. And it worked. So I said, hey, you know what? I'm going to give up these two players. I knew the guy that wanted them. I said, why don't you take them? And they're going, oh, yeah. I said, but if you take them, how about you give up these two players to so and so instead? Because I knew he wanted those. Because I knew this guy wanted two of his players. This guy wanted two of mine. So when I set the agenda, I just put up the horse trade first. I said, well, I'll give you these two. Why don't you give them those two? Right? And everybody's all happy and they're all thinking, hey, we made it out. We got what they wanted. I knew it because I was informed. And then it became the next thing. Well, but I'll only agree to this if I get these players and I picked them off the trial list. Right? So the order in which you do things can impact success. So they got what they wanted. I got the three I wanted, and we went on to be very successful. But the order in which you discuss things has power. It gives you the ability to persuade people because it builds momentum to the conclusion that you want. Alternatives and options. Again, thinking through all of them, right? And being able to adjust, but knowing what the alternatives and options are, whether they're good, bad, ugly, it doesn't matter. It's understanding them, what the pros and cons are to you, what the pros and cons are to the other party. Understanding that allows you to be more persuasive because you can turn on a dime if necessary. And then you get attitudinal structuring, which is um, basically it's kind of a science thing. You can look it up. It's kind of a science thing. It's where you set up the conditions of your negotiation or the interactions to get people to change their behaviors and that. It's like I said, I've never, I guess informally I've kind of done some of it, but that to me it's more about just giving people opportunities to meet and talk openly. And by using active listening skills, you changed how people behave. Because if it's very close and you're in this, people are going to behave a certain way. And, they're going to approach the negotiation a certain way, as opposed to if you're open and you share information or appropriate information and you're encouraging them to share information and you're focusing on improving communication, changing how things happen changes how they behave. And that's probably the best way I can explain. Contrast, I do like to use contrasting. And the reason being is I usually take you know, when it comes to persuasion, I usually take an extreme here, an extreme here, and I'll give people options to see what they're doing. To see, hey, well, would you rather have this or this? Would you rather have, you know, high volume, like, high volume, low price, or less inventory and a higher price? Like you want to give them contrast because what they pick and say, well, I kind of like in this. Why do you like that one better? And then it's an opportunity to get information. And as you get information, you can share information that's appropriate and it helps you persuade them because you can start to hear information that's going to get them to yes. Commitment, consistency, these things. Framing is a big one, right? How you frame something, can persuade people. We see it all the time. It's politicians are famous for it. They like to spin stuff. Sometimes framing can be called spin, but how you present something, impacts whether or not you can persuade somebody in many cases. Delayed liking. This is, delayed liking this is peripheral. This isn't so much direct. This is kind of, other things that kind of contribute. As you notice, when I talk about looking at yourself and what you're doing, these are things that come into that. But delayed liking is just simply taking time, not automatically trusting somebody, doing it over time, building that rapport and trust over time. It's almost like the show me approach. Yeah, I'll trust you to a degree, and then we'll do a little more, and I'll trust you a little more, but it's over time. Foibles is just, make fun of yourself for a while. If you make a mistake, just, yeah, 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 silly me, but you know what? Admitting that you're human, that you can make mistakes when in a while, something comes, like being able to laugh at yourself on that, certainly helps, people because they can see that that you can make a mistake and that, the importance you've taken steps to correct it, but you know what, you're not perfect. So that certainly helps. Um, Priming the pump is, exactly that, doing something to help people out. Um, Reactance is it's again it's framing your um, communication your offers in a way that tries to strike an emotional attachment where you're pulling the heartstrings or um, you might try to change the context and stuff like that. You're trying to provoke a kind of more of an emotional reaction to it, and not in a set them off, but a way that touches on the emotions of things to get people, yeah, I want to help out with that or whatever. So that's kind of what reactance is. It's psychobabble. You can look it up, but it is important because again, people want to, if you touch on those things that are important to people, those principles that they have, it helps persuade them because it fits with what their core is. It's their personality in that. Yeah, foot in the door. Um, oh, sorry about that. I will close that off. Apologize. I'll just put that there. Foot in the door is, I don't know if anybody's ever heard Kirby vacuums before. It used to be a door-to-door sales approach. Their approach was 21 yeses to get a sale. And what they would do is it would be get an agreement on something small and then slowly just keep asking for a little bit more, And so it's ask for something, easy, small and easy to get in and then something a little more. And then, you do something to get agreement to start discussion, you keep going. Door in the face is kind of where you make a big thing that you don't really expect they're going to say yes to. And when they say no, then you turn around to come up with something more reasonable. Um, I don't think that works. I think it's kind of stupid. I think it doesn't help with trust. I don't think it's just a personal opinion. I don't like using it because I think it makes you look a little out of touch if you ask for something really big, just for them to say no to then to come back with something more reasonable. But there's some people that will certainly you know say that's the only way to go. I think our current president thinks that in the States. He likes to go big and then he always seems to come down to something a little more reasonable. And that's all. Like, sometimes, is that when somebody's offered something, just say, yeah, I like that, but I'd like to see improvement here. Like, it's okay to ask for something else. Now we're going to try something here, and I hope that it works. So the sound may not, we've been testing it, and the sound hasn't. I'm going to show you a short video here. And I hope that this is showing here. The sound hasn't been always kicking in right away. So it might take a second. But I'm going to show you a short video that's got some great things here that will help you about with persuasion. So we're going to show that, and it's not very long, it's about 10 minutes. So I'm going to start right now.
Researchers have been studying the factors that influence us to say yes to the requests of others for over 60 years. And there can be no doubt that there's a science to how we are persuaded. And a lot of this science is surprising. When making a decision, it would be nice to think that people consider all the available information in order to guide their thinking. But the reality is very often different. In the increasingly overloaded lives we lead, more than ever, we need shortcuts or rules of thumb to guide our decision making. My own research has identified just 6 of these shortcuts as universals that guide human behavior. They are reciprocity, scarcity, authority, consistency, liking, and consensus. Understanding these shortcuts and employing them in an effective manner can significantly increase the chances that someone will be persuaded by your request. Let's take a closer look at each in turn.
So, the first universal principle of influence is reciprocity. Simply put, people are obliged to give back to others the form of behavior, gift, or service that they have received first. If a friend invites you to their party, there's an obligation for you to invite them to a future party you are hosting. If a colleague does you a favor, then you owe that colleague a favor. And in the context of a social obligation, people are more likely to say yes to those that they owe. One of the best demonstrations of the principle of reciprocation comes from a series of studies conducted in restaurants. So the last time you visited a restaurant, there's a good chance that the waiter or waitress would have given you a gift, probably at about the same time that they bring you a bill, a liqueur perhaps, or a fortune cookie, or perhaps a simple mint. So here's the question. Does the giving of a mint have any influence over how much tip you're going to leave them? Most people will say no, but that mint can make a surprising difference. In the study, giving diners a single mint at the end of their meal typically increased tips by around 3%. Interestingly, if the gift is doubled and 2 mints are provided, tips don't double. They quadruple, a 14% increase in tips. But perhaps most interestingly of all is the fact that if the waiter provides 1 mint, starts to walk away from the table, but pauses, turns back, and says, for you nice people, here's an extra mint, tips go through the roof. A 23% increase influenced not by what was given, but how it was given. So the key to using the principle of reciprocation is to be the first to give and to ensure that what you give is personalized and unexpected.
The second universal principle of persuasion is scarcity. Simply put, people want more of those things they can have less of. When British Airways announced in 2003 that they would no longer be operating the twice-daily London-New York Concorde flight because it had become uneconomical to run, sales the very next day took off. Notice that nothing had changed about the Concorde itself. It certainly didn't fly any faster, the service didn't suddenly get better, and the airfare didn't drop. It had simply become a scarce resource, and as a result, people wanted it more. So when it comes to effectively persuading others using the scarcity principle, the science is clear. It's not enough simply to tell people about the benefits they'll gain if they choose your products and services. You'll also need to point out what is unique about your proposition and what they stand to lose if they fail to consider your proposal.
Our third principle of influence is the principle of authority, the idea that people follow the lead of credible, knowledgeable experts. Physiotherapists, for example, are able to persuade more of their patients to comply with recommended exercise programs if they display their medical diplomas on the walls of their consulting rooms. People are more likely to give change for a parking meter to a complete stranger if that requester wears a uniform rather than casual clothes. What the science is telling us is that it's important to signal to others what makes you a credible, knowledgeable authority before you make your influence attempt. Of course, this can present problems. You can hardly go around telling potential customers how brilliant you are, but you can certainly arrange for someone to do it for you. And surprisingly, the science tells us that it doesn't seem to matter if the person who introduces you is not only connected to you, but also likely to prosper from the introduction themselves. One group of real estate agents were able to increase both the number of property appraisals and the number of subsequent contracts that they wrote by arranging for reception staff who answered customer inquiries to first mention their colleagues' credentials and expertise. So, customers interested in letting a property were told, lettings? Let me connect you with Sandra, who has over 15 years' experience letting properties in this area. Customers who wanted more information about selling properties were told, speak to Peter, our head of sales. He has over 20 years' experience selling properties. I'll put you through now. The impact of this expert introduction led to a 20% rise, a 15% rise in the number of contracts. Not bad for a small change informed from persuasion science that was both ethical and costless to implement.
The next principle is consistency. People like to be consistent with the things they have previously said or done. Consistency is activated by looking for and asking for small initial commitments that can be made. In one famous set of studies, researchers found, rather unsurprisingly, that very few people would be willing to erect an unsightly wooden board on their front lawn to support a drive safely campaign in their neighborhood. However, in a similar neighborhood close by, 4 times as many homeowners indicated that they would be willing to erect this unsightly billboard. Why? Because 10 days previously, they had agreed to place a small postcard in the front window of their home that signaled their support for a Drive Safely campaign. That small card was the initial commitment that led to a 400% increase in a much bigger but still consistent change. So, when seeking to influence using the consistency principle, the detective of influence looks for voluntary, active, and public commitments, and ideally gets those commitments in writing. For example, one recent study reduced missed appointments at health centers by 18%, simply by asking the patients rather than the staff to write down appointment details on the future appointment card.
The fifth principle is the principle of liking. People prefer to say yes to those that they like. But what causes one person to love another? Persuasion science tells us that there are 3 important factors. We like people who are similar to us, we like people who pay us compliments, and we like people who cooperate with us towards mutual goals. As more and more of the interactions that we are having take place online, it might be worth asking whether these factors can be employed effectively in, let's say, online negotiations. In a series of negotiation studies carried out between MBA students at 2 well-known business schools, the students were told, time is money, straight down to business. Between around 55% were able to come to an agreement. A second group, however, were told, before you begin negotiating, exchange some personal information with each other. Identify a similarity you share in common. Then begin negotiating. In this group, 90% of them were able to come to successful and agreeable outcomes that were typically worth 18% more for both parties. So to harness this powerful principle of liking, be sure to look for areas of similarity that you share with others and genuine compliments you can give before you get down to business.
The final principle is consensus. Especially when they are uncertain, people will look to the actions and behaviors of others to determine their own. You may have noticed that hotels often place a small card in bathrooms that attempt to persuade guests to reuse their towels and linen. Most do this by drawing a guest's attention to the benefits that reuse can have on environmental protection. It turns out that this is a pretty effective strategy, leading to around 35% compliance. But could there be an even more effective one? Well, it turns out that about 75% of people who check into a hotel for 4 nights or longer will reuse their towels at some point during their stay. So what would happen if we took a lesson from the principle of consensus and simply included that information on the cards and said that 75% of our guests reuse their towels at some time during the stay? So please do so as well. It turns out that when we do this, towel reuse rises by 26%. Now imagine the next time you stayed in a hotel, you saw one of these signs. You picked it up and you read the following message. 75% of people who have stayed in this room have reused their towel. What would you think? Well, here's what you might think. I hope we're not the same towels. And like most people, you probably think that this sign will have healthy things on your behavior whatsoever. But it turns out that changing just a few words on a sign to honestly encounter what competent previous guests have done was the single most effective message, leading to a 33% increase in reuse. So the science is telling us that rather than we can look at what we can always and already doing, especially in single others.
So then we have 6 scientifically validated utility solutions to provide for smooth and practical and often costless changes that can lead to big differences in the ability to influence and persuade others that entirely differently left. They are secrets for science persuasion.
Okay. So I hope we didn't lose everyone. I hope you didn't fall asleep. And I hope you enjoyed that. It's a really good video. We use it in our workshop. We've been using it for a few years now because it does tie together many of the things that I talked about that come around to, building trust, to persuading people, getting to yes in that negotiation. Because as I said, it's much of what negotiation is trying to uncover what motivates someone to say yes. And you heard in the video there, I talked about things that I mentioned before about how do you frame things? How do you present it? How do you get to, those underlying things that will generally cause somebody to say yes, get to an agreement. So I hope that they were useful. The video is called Science Persuasion. It's available on YouTube. You can certainly look it up and watch it again yourself, if you want to. But moving on to, our next steps is you get an unethical negotiation, and people have always, you always run into somebody that does these things. And, whether it be lying or competitive bargaining, where they go back and forth with people and, they'll talk to you, then they'll go that, and hey, so-and-so they come back, well, so-and-so is going to do this, or, so, she's going to do this or that. And, that's not, ethical in a sense. You might be manipulating an opponent's network. You might have shared relationships and you're trying to plant, information that, is going to get back to the other party that might put them in a twist or mislead them. That's not really ethical. Reneging on agreements, obviously, putting out an offer, pulling it off the table, these are things that are generally, unethical. The big one I just want to touch base on is, on the lying piece. Now, this one, everybody knows what a lie is, but everybody else in a negotiation hasn't always exactly told the 100% truth, when they've been in a negotiation. So where is the line? That's really where the question is that you might say, yeah, this is the price I'm looking for, right? You might say, yeah, I want to buy, but they said, what price do you look for? I want to buy it for $5. When you're really willing to accept $7, that's not lying in a sense. It's a negotiating position. Lying when we're talking about is something you're actually outright doing that is not truth, that you're trying to, it's a little more extreme than that. Haggling around the price and embellishing your price, and then landing at something that's fair is just part of negotiations. But telling people something that's basically not true about, well, I've got this and I'm doing this volumes, and I'm gonna buy this volume, and then when you don't, or if you're saying that, you've got whatever. I mean, it's hard to describe, but there's a difference between something that you're doing that's outright misleading and something that's part of the process. And we're going to talk about what, how do you differentiate, here in a sec. And this is really where it comes down to, when it comes down to either ethical or whether or not what you're doing is, what I consider the, lying and that sort of stuff is, would you want it to be on the front page of the newspaper? I know that's getting, that's kind of an old school way of doing it because newspapers aren't exactly the most common way of doing it, but would you want what you're saying to be out there in front of everybody? Would you want it to be put on blast on TikTok or LinkedIn or, any other social medias or in the newspapers? And the thing is, if what you're doing, you wouldn't want people to know about, if you would not want it to all of a sudden get broadcast everywhere, then you probably shouldn't be doing it. And that's the first test. And that's the one that I've always used. Is if it's not something that I'd be willing to let get out there and be willing to be accountable for, to be willing to explain or justify, um, then I don't do it. And that's everybody's got their own moral code, so to speak, and there's going to change, but that, social pressure and the need to be seen as right, everywhere, not to be, and you should see how the social media mobs can jump on people now. But that's probably the single best way is, do you want the world to see your behavior? And if you don't, you probably shouldn't be doing it because it's probably wrong. And that comes back to what I was talking about before. Haggling on a price, right? I don't think I could justify how people go, but turning around and lying about my capabilities, lying about um, you know, my financial situation, my ability to actually pay, lying about those things, I think that's where it starts to cross the line. Reverse golden rule. Everybody knows the golden rule is treat others as you'd like to be treated. Well, the reverse golden rule is a little different. It's treat yourself as like you're going to treat others, right? It's about looking after yourself a little bit, but it's also, treat yourself with the same expectations you're going to expect from everybody else. Role modeling, yeah, you can work with counterparts and you can do role models in a negotiation ahead of time to see how it goes and get feedback on the approach and whether people think it's appropriate or not. Third party advice is a really great one. You can talk to people about, I'm going to do this, this, and this, and get advice whether they think it's all right. And if it's somebody that you were close to you that respects you or you respect, that you can trust to give you good advice, I'll tell you, you know what, that's not cool. You probably shouldn't be doing that. That's going to help you, with understanding whether or not you should be acting in a certain way or not. And obviously, you know, strengthen your bargaining position is back to Batten again. Is that usually when people start to stray, into what would be considered unethical, it's because they don't have good alternatives. They have a weak BATNA, they don't have good options. They're desperate because it might mean, it's detrimental to the business if they don't get a deal. And so what happens is they start to cut corners. And as soon as you cut corners is where you lead into trouble, right? And it's one thing, for the traditional things, if you're doing something that um, you can get sued for, right? Because you misrepresented, the situation, or you did not fulfilling your contract because you lied about your ability to do it, your capability of being able to complete it. It's one thing, on that side where it can cost you court time and liability and money in that. It's another about your reputation. Is that, our industry, your industries are not necessarily all that big. I mean, Winnipeg itself has been sometimes considered the biggest small town in Canada because everybody seems to know everybody. That's the thing is that as soon as you get known for somebody that's not behaving in an ethical manner, um, that can't be trusted, that gets around and it impacts the ability of your ability to do business with other people. So the best way to avoid that temptation to have to cut corners, and to do something unethical or illegal in some cases, is to strengthen your BATNA. Always be looking at how do I have better options, and think about the front page test, and use your trusted family members or trusted business acquaintances to say, hey, look, I'm thinking about doing this. What do you think? And they're going to tell you whether or not it's, there. And don't just one person, do it to multiple people. Because again, somebody might go, I'm going to go talk to so and so because they'll agree with me. But no, seek out those opinions and a third party advice and have as many people as possible give you an idea about what you're doing is right or not. And with that, a little shorter today, but that's where we are. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. I'm certainly happy to take any questions. I'm not sure if we will have any today. I certainly hope so. I wasn't that good, but I am ready for any questions that somebody may have.
I do have some questions coming in for you, Rick.
Right on.
How do power imbalances affect the choice of negotiation tactics?
Well, it can big time, and it's really hard if you're the weaker party. Um, Usually, if you have if you have somebody that has a lot of power, they usually exercise it, and they'll use it as that stick to get you to agree to terms that you may not necessarily be happy with, but you're kind of have to because the business is important to you being able to survive. I remember when I dealt with Walmart, when I was with Coghlan's, and Walmart was one of our customers. Um, what was most frustrating is it was Walmart. We did all their private label stuff in the States, and we were selling into Walmart Canada. And so it was obviously a lot of sales. But what we'd get every month, we'd do the shipments and we'd send it out with our bill. And then we'd get, we might send them a bill for $100,000, and then all of a sudden we'd get, $88,000 with $12,000 worth of $12,000 debit memo. And then the debit memo would be for returns. And I'm going, I go, well, how do I know the returns? Like, we charge you, they return. Okay, did you put them back on the shelf? No, we tossed them out. Well, how do I know you tossed them out? Like you couldn't do anything about it. Like it was just they had the power, we didn't. If you wanted to be in that, stores, I was just you had to accept the fact that they were going to do this. So, that's the one thing where it certainly does. On yours, you're going to appeal a little differently. You're going to try to find a way to go, yeah, they're going to do this, but how do I raise my importance? How do I appeal to them emotionally? How do I appeal to that concept of fairness? You know, that, if you do this, I may not be able to supply you. Like you talk about the risks of what it does to your ability um, to fulfill your requirements for them. So you can try those things and hope that somebody might identify with you or show some empathy where they might, you know, shave, they sand down some of the rougher edges of what they're doing. So depending on whether you're weaker or more powerful party, you're going to approach it differently in a lot of cases. Probably my advice is that if you're the person that's in the more powerful position, the key is to really be conscious about how you're using your power. Because, there's some companies that it's just, yeah, we're going to use it and that's what it is. And, we're Walmart, or we used to, when I was at McDermott, some of my fellow buyers, we did that when I was at McDermott Lumber here. The thing is how you exercise it can have an impact going forward. Is that, you might find that companies just say, yeah, they might do it right now, but in the meantime, they're looking for another customer that can make up that volume that's more profitable, doesn't act like a jerk. And all of a sudden they may turn around and say, we're not going to sell to you anymore. And then you're going, well, then I got to go find somebody else. It's expensive to go find suppliers. And so if you're the person in the position of power, um, be careful how you wield it. Or just because you can doesn't mean you should, right? Look for those win-wins, help those people succeed, and they'll help you, you succeed as well. If you're the person that's in a position of weakness, it's the same thing. Do whatever you can to improve your alternatives. What can you do to improve your BANA? Who can you work with? Understand the company you're doing business with. How do they view success? And how do I change my own behavior to kind of fit more with it so that I can actually more likely get some concessions because I'm contributing to what they feel success is. I'm not talking just sell this whole transactional thing, but if you can adjust how you do something that helps them achieve their goals, right? Then you might get a more favorable deal. So it's about being creative. It's about listening. Sometimes there's not a lot you can do, but it is about keep your eyes and ears open, and always be probing for where there's an opportunity if you're on the weaker party. So I hope that answers the question a little bit.
Thank you, Rick. How can anchoring, framing, or silence influence outcomes?
Oh, I love that question, whoever asked it. Um, Big time. Like anchoring is a great technique to keep the discussion on the tangent that you want. Um, because anchoring is like somebody might try to take it in a different direction, and anchoring, um, anchoring or re-anchoring that discussion. Say, yeah, no, I agree with that, and yes, we certainly need to talk about it. However, before we get to, I really need understanding on this. What can you tell me about this? And you keep taking it back to it's kind of like that agenda. Is anchoring allows you to acknowledge, like you get, oh, I don't want to talk about, you get, I don't want to talk about that. What do you bring that up for? This is what's important. There's that approach, right? Which is going to get you into this, where if somebody's going, wait a sec, this is important to me. What are you, why are you dismissing me like that? As opposed to, I hear you, I agree, we need to talk about that. However, before we get to that, I really don't understand this. It's going to be critical. What can you tell me about this? How does this work? What can we do about this? You know, so what you do is you acknowledge it, you show respect that you heard them. Yes, we're going to get to it, but then you just re-anchor it back over here to where you want to go, because the order in which you agree to things can help you. Just like I said on the agenda, it can help you get to an agreement on something later that might be contentious, because you might say, this person might be saying, I want to talk about delivery. It's going to be contentious, you know, and so what you want to do is you want to go, so you kind of go over here. What can I give them? Where can I get agreement on stuff that maybe isn't as important to me, where I can give some concessions away? So I can get a bigger concession over here on the item they want to talk about. So anchoring is a very, very powerful tool. Um, Silence is another one. I use it quite a bit. And silence with eye contact is even better. Um, you have people don't like silence. It makes everybody uncomfortable. And you heard me in another session talk about, get comfortable with silence. So when somebody starts throwing things at you, whether you agree with it or not, whether hey, I like what I hear or whether not, you know, depending on where you are in the negotiation, or if you're trying to learn more still, if you're trying to, um, if you're trying to keep, guiding the conclusion, it's just sitting there being silent, right? And just looking them in the eye and being silent. And you'll find that they will start, again, very, very rarely will they not, is because most people aren't comfortable. They'll start dumping stuff all over. They'll think, oh, geez, I ticked them off. And they'll start spitting stuff out to try to justify it. And they'll do more information about why they came to what it is. Well, we think this is better for you, this is better because it helps you with this and this and then, and what happens is, in their attempt to get away, to not feel uncomfortable, and that fear that they might have made a mistake, they all of a sudden start, in many cases, to start sharing more information. Now, some of it's irrelevant, but more often than not, if something important is going to come, that's going to allow you to go dig into it. Because what they're going to do is, it's human nature, is that also they say that, and the first thing that comes to mind, I think I might have just screwed up what I needed. Like, they need or want are part of the strategy. And by silence, they start spitting up because they're trying to justify what it is, and they're going to give away what their strategy is or what their goal is or whatever. And as soon as you hear something, hey, wait a sec, is that what they're after? Well, what does this mean about this? And they've kind of done it to themselves, because now you get to start using those open-ended questions, start drawing information about what their needs are, what their wants are, what their alternatives are, those kind of things. So silence is a really great one. And you can be silent, but silent with eye contact really makes people uncomfortable because they don't know what the heck to do. And so they start sharing. And I think there was a third one. There was anchoring, silence, and what was the third one in that?
Framing,
Oh, framing, yeah. And
anchoring, framing, and silence.
yeah, and framing is everything. right? Is in framing, the same thing is how you frame it. And I'll go back to that example about, we really need to be talking about delivery. Why do you want to talk about that? Like, why are we talking about that? That's not, we need to talk about this. This is more important versus, yes, that's very important. Yes, we need to talk about that. And I've got some ideas I'd like to share with you, see what you think. However, before we get to that, I really think we need to finish this up because I really don't understand how this is working and how this fits. What can you tell me about this? Right? So there's an example just right off on framing and you have that discussion. How do you frame it? And I framed it in a way that was positive, that was open, that was collaborative, that was respectful, that acknowledged what they were saying, but took it over here. And as opposed to the other one where I just was just outright dismissive. So framing how you frame something is critical. And the other piece about framing is not just on that example, but it's also just on how you frame offers. And that's the hypotheticals. It's the contrast that we talk about is that, well, you know, how would you want to go? Like we have a couple options. I mean, I can either give you this price if you're buying this volume, right? If you have space and you want to, and the cash flow, if you want to buy this volume, I can give you this price. But, if you're in a situation where you don't have the space, but and that I can deliver as needed to point of use, but the price is going to be a little bit higher. Which one do you think fits better for you? And and so they're going to pick, and then by the contrast and the way you framed it, they're going to tell you just by which one they pick is going to tell you what the hot button issue is. If all of a sudden they're going, yeah, the lower volumes, that makes sense. So why is the lower volumes? What kind of space do you have? Like what kind of, what kind of space do you have in your warehouse? What are you going to do this? Like you get to dig into what it is. Like they're going to tell you the issue you have to resolve. So by contrasting it and framing the question that way, you're going to be able to draw more information and you're going to get information just by the answer they give because that's contrasting. That's here and here. High volume, low price, lower volume, bigger price. And then they're going to pick, well, I want this one. Okay, good. Then we're over here. Let's go to this. And then it takes you down a different way of questions where you can go. So all three of them are hugely important and if done well, are going to get you to a successful outcome.
I have one last question.
Sure.
And this is the last call for questions. So if anyone else would like to ask one, please type it in. The question is regarding repairing mistrust. What if I apologize and the other party does not accept my apology? Then what?
Well, then and just, I understand that. Why? What is the issue? Or you can ask them why not. Just I understand. Okay, I can respect that. May I ask why? Is there another issue that we need to deal with? Right? It's just it's kind of like a no. Um, it's an opportunity to get more. And it's going to depend if somebody does, it's also going to depend on how important that relationship is to you, how important that supplier is to you. Again, I've apologized many times when I don't think I've done anything wrong, but I've done it to de-escalate and try to get to a point where we can actually have a discussion. Now, if somebody doesn't want to, right? If they feel that we've done something, say, well, what would you like me to do? Right? Yeah, mistakes happen, but what would you like me to do? Like, but it comes down if it's a strategically critical supplier, you're gonna dig into it. If it's somebody that's a one-shot deal and they want to be petty about it, yeah, okay, just say, well, I understand that. And just go. It really depends on how valuable that relationship is to you. And if they're not accepting it, which I haven't had really, other than a couple of real crazy ones that I stopped doing business with anyways, but for other reasons other than the fact they didn't accept an apology. Um, but generally what you'll find is that by doing it, people will realize is that if all of a sudden you can take a moment to go do that and you can say that, the natural response is for somebody to say, you know what, I'm sorry about how I did that too. Right? And then you say, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. So what can we do to go forward? What can we do to avoid this so we can go forward together and be successful? That's, 99% of the time kind of how it's gone. And you get into a productive discussion, about how do you go forward. But if somebody's that where they're just gonna live and die on it, my advice is unless it's a strategically critical supplier that you need, um, I just say, yeah, okay, I understand it, and I need to move on and go find somebody else. Um, because you just don't have time for that, especially if you're a small business owner. You don't have time to be, doing that. If you do the mature thing and you try to go forward on that and they choose not to, you got better use of your time. You got to be making money and going forward. You can't work on that. But I hope that answers the question.
I think that's all for questions for today. So we will close early and give you a half an hour back in your day. I'm sure you're all very busy. Thank you again, Rick, for another great presentation. It's always a pleasure. And thank you all for joining us today.
Thank you,
At the
everyone.
close
See you
of,
next.
no, we won't see them next week.
I
Our
guess it's
final
2 weeks from now, right?
session, yeah, our final session is 2 weeks from now on March 12th. We hope you will join us again because we're finishing the series with a important topic, active listening.
All right, everyone. Thank you again for sharing, and I hope it was valuable. Thank you.